In quiet, shimmering wetlands of the Mekong Delta, an old farmer named Min lived a life woven into the rhythm of the tides and the seasons. His small wooden house stood on stilts, watching over rice fields that stretched out to kiss the horizon. Every morning, long before the sun painted the sky, Min would walk side by side with his water buffalo. Sao was a calm, gentle giant, a companion who had worked these same fields with Min for more than 20 years. After Min's wife passed away and his children sought their fortunes in distant cities, Sao became more than just a farm animal. The buffalo was Min's routine, his confidant, the silent, steady presence that filled the vast, empty spaces of his life. The other villagers would often joke, with a knowing smile, that Min spoke more to Sao than to any person. And in many ways, they were right. He shared his thoughts with the animal, his memories, his quiet worries, and Sao would just listen, his large, dark eyes full of an ancient understanding. One year, the monsoon season arrived with a fury unlike any other. The rains didn't just fall. They descended, a relentless curtain of water that refused to stop. Rivers, once gentle lifelines, swelled into raging torrents, swallowing their banks and devouring the land. The vibrant green of the rice fields vanished beneath a murky, rising sea. Entire Biaches homes that had stood for generations were submerged, forcing a frantic scramble for higher ground. Rescue teams, overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster, arrived too late for many of the more remote areas. In the face of nature's wrath, it was the people who had to save themselves, neighbor helping neighbor escape the flood's cold embrace. In the midst of this chaos, Sao was called into service. Volunteers, recognizing the buffalo's immense strength, took him to help pull makeshift carts laden with trapped children and the elderly. They navigated through waist-deep, swirling floodwaters, a desperate convoy fighting against the current. Min, swept up in the mass evacuation, was separated from his companion. Long after the storm had finally passed and the waters began their slow retreat, Min searched desperately for his buffalo. He walked the flooded roads, his voice hoarse from calling Suzao's name into the desolate, watery landscape. But Sao never returned. The silence that answered his calls was heavy and absolute. Days turned into a week. Min found himself at a temporary shelter, a ghost among the displaced, his heart a hollow ache. It was there that a young volunteer approached him, her expression a mixture of sorrow and profound respect. She gently asked him to follow her to a nearby rescue camp. When they arrived, a group of survivors gathered around him. Their faces were etched with loss, but their eyes held a story they needed to share. One by one, they told him about Sao. They spoke of how the great animal had carried impossibly heavy loads for hours on end, pulling the carts through currents that would have swept a person away. They described how Sao climbed muddy, treacherous slopes, his powerful legs straining, refusing to stop even as exhaustion consumed him. Witnesses recounted the final moments. They said the animal struggled to even stand after the very last group of people reached the safety of dry ground. Ayad held on, pushing through the pain and the weariness, until he knew everyone was safe. Only then, when his mission was complete, did he finally collapse. Min stood there, enveloped by their words, and a deep, still silence fell over him. There were no tears, there was no anger, just a vast, profound quiet that seemed to absorb all the sound and sorrow around him. That night, Min made his way back to his flooded farm, alone. The world he knew was gone, replaced by a still, dark expanse of water. The empty harness, worn smooth by years of work, hung by the door, a silent testament to a life that was no more. All the footprints, his and Sao's, had been washed away. For the first time in over 2 decades, the rice fields felt utterly, unbearably quiet. The soul of the land was gone. But in the days that followed, as displaced families began the monumental task of rebuilding their shattered lives, a new purpose took root in Min's heart. He made a decision that would change everything. He donated his land, the fields he and Sao had tended for a lifetime, so that the community of survivors could grow food together. From the mud and the loss, something new began to grow. Neighbors rebuilt their homes side by side, their bonds forged in tragedy. Laughter returned as children played once more in the fields that had been filled with water, and they named this new community project Suez Field. Years have passed since that devastating flood, and now, every monsoon season begins with a quiet, solemn ceremony by the river. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the water, the villagers gather. A simple wooden bell hangs from a bamboo frame. A child, usually the youngest in the village, is lifted up to ring it. Just one gentle, clear tone echoes across the water, a sound of remembrance, honoring the animal that carried hope through the storm. And sometimes, when the evening wind moves softly through the ripening stalks of rice in Sue's field, the old-timers will pause their work, and they'll smile. They say if you listen closely enough, you can still hear it. The steady, rhythmic footsteps of a great buffalo walking beside an old farmer, just as it always had. True sacrifice, the kind that changes the world, often happens quietly, without any expectation of recognition or reward. It's the strength that shows up when all hope seems lost. Sue's story reminds us that heroes come in all forms, and their legacy lives on not in monuments of stone, but in the communities they saved and the lives they touched. If someone you knew gave everything they had to save others, how would you choose to honor their memory? Think about it. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it and subscribing for more stories that matter.